Another episode of the Juice on the Cuse podcast. Wes Cheng alongside Brad Bierman. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday, November 5, 2024. It's election day. It's also the second day of the Syracuse basketball season. Syracuse with a very shaky 86-82 win over Moyne in their home opener. Brad, that was a very concerning performance from the Orange. What were your key takeaways from the game?
Well, tying into the election theme, Wes, I certainly think if you ask a Syracuse fan to vote, would you take a W or an L? That's going to be an easy choice. First game of the season, 3 new starters against your crosstown rivals, playing with house money, nothing to lose, despite some injured players, and a competitive game. What I take away is that I think we have to calm down a little bit here and take it for what it's worth. Again, 3 new starters. Coaching staff is new, learning that, had the 2 scrimmages to kind of, shake out a little bit of the X's and O's there, and the coaching staff to get what they wanted. But this is why you play an opening game against a Moyne. I don't think betting points aside, 22-point favorites or whatnot, you have to throw all that out at the first game of the season. Wes, you've seen so many of these, depending on who's on the schedule. Some years Syracuse has played in a tournament against a big name, and for the most part, certainly the last 10 or 15 years against a lower Division I team, which is how you want to kind of open up to test new things. I thought that what was most important, that in the second half, Syracuse did what they had to do to win the game. That's the most important. But the pieces to get there obviously are going to need a lot of work. And I like how the schedule plays out to have almost a week to game 2. So it's a win, a lot to pick apart. And I think you have to be satisfied that the coaching staff is going to take a look at that and make improvements for game 2 against Colgate.
Yeah. So, Brad, I think to your point, it's hopefully a wake-up call to the Syracuse players that they just can't come in and think just because they're Syracuse, they can just walk over what I think will be a quad 4 team in the end. But it is just one game. And I also think and hope that everyone should take a deep breath, understand this is probably an outlier game. And Syracuse is going to be, I think, a very good shooting team this year. And we saw that in the exhibition games against Slippery Rock and Clarion. And they're just not going to shoot 4 for 22 from downtown each night. And I also think that, playing in a tight game early shows you who Adrian Autry trusts early on. It looks like this is going to be a tight 7-man rotation when it comes down to the really tough games. And you saw that last night because it was mostly Jair Davis who had an outstanding game, a double-double, and Lucas Taylor off the bench. And that was kind of it for his bench. He didn't really open it up other than that. Elijah Moore not really playing. Peter Mastroff, the Euro transfer, is really didn't play that much. So I do think from a 10,000-foot view, you have to give Syracuse a little bit of a break and pull back and understand that it's the first game of the season. And Brad, I know that it didn't look like an NCAA tournament team last night, but when you look around the ACC, when you look around the schedule that Syracuse faces in non-conference play, what needs to break right there for the Orange to get to the NCAA tournament? Or are we even too premature to even be thinking about that right now?
I really think, Wes, we're too premature to be thinking about that right now after one game. And looking around at the scores, what I think is really interesting that so many, if not all, the teams play on the opening night in college basketball. I really love that. I really like to see everybody start out on the same night. And looking at the scores in the ACC, I see a lot of the similarities to what happened in Syracuse Moyne, named teams struggling to put away smaller name schools. So I don't think that's anything unusual on the opening night of the season, where everybody's coming out after having, practiced for 6-7 weeks and then had a couple of scrimmages. I think this team is going to develop. And to your point on the roster management after one game, what I thought was very interesting, okay, the starting 5 of Carlos, Sterling, Lampkin, Bell, and Freeman, and then the 5 on the court at the end of the game where Jair Davis was playing a little bit more than Freeman. And, we saw his contributions at both ends of the court. I think Peter Mastorovic's going to play as a backup. You're going to need him there. But you're right. I think, and Taylor's going to play a little bit, but Choppa Moore is going to, come along here and practice, and I think they're going to get him much more playing time in November and December. And the question mark to me is Kyle Cuff, and of course the big question mark, as it's been for a while, with Chance Westry. But you're right. I think it's going to come down to 7 or 8 players, and I think those players, Wes, will develop. I've always said this about Syracuse basketball, especially with Jim Boeheim. Get better as the season goes on. I don't see any difference with that. I know that a lot of diehard fans reading some of the online, commentary after the first game, typical to me, knee-jerk reaction of the most passionate fans in the fan base, fanning flames and all this, pessimism. First of all, that's a trademark of Syracuse fans in Central New York. They're always glass half empty to begin with. And second of all, it's just too early. There's just not enough to really see from a team so far this season after one game.
So, Brad, you and I were talking about this and looking at the schedule at the beginning of the season, as we always do. And I do think I'm going to look ahead a little bit here, because I think the NCAA tournament is going to come down to a few games, at least as it relates to the non-conference schedule. So they're going to play Texas, they're going to play Tennessee, both ranked teams, and then Maryland in non-conference play. If they really want to be a true NCAA tournament team, it would be nice to see them take 2 of 3 from there. Now, I know that's very difficult because, again, it's at Tennessee, Texas on a neutral court. And then they need to play a clean sheet from there, because they cannot lose to a Colgate. They cannot lose to a Georgetown. And they're going to need to tread water in the ACC, maybe play a little bit above 500 to put themselves in the conversation for the NCAA tournament. That's already assuming that there's not going to be any more scares against again, a Colgate, a Youngstown State, a Cornell that's on the schedule. They need to have a clean sheet from there. And again, I think they need 2-3 against those really tough non-conference opponents.
I agree, but I think, again, taking a step back, I don't think this team is going to play at the same level against Colgate as they did against Moyne. And subsequently, I don't think they'll play at the same level against Youngstown State. So those 2 games come before Texas. So I think the Syracuse team that heads down to Brooklyn to face Texas is not going to be the Syracuse team you saw in the opener against Moyne. And I say that because I think there'll be improved 3-point shooting. I think it'll be more efficient by the players that shoot it. I think they'll be a little bit wiser playing defensively. Now, granted, Texas is going to have better athletes in Moyne, so that will be a challenge there. But I think the progress of this team as it gets to those games that you highlight early on will be at the point where you can sit back and then analyze that game afterwards and then go from that point on.
So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to have Syracuse.com's Mike Waters on after. This is the Juice on the Cuse podcast. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch games as they happen. BetOnline has the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, NHL to entertainment and political props. Head to BetOnline today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. Back on the Juice on the Cuse podcast, Wes Cheng here with you, and we are thrilled as always to be joined by our great friend, Syracuse.com's Mike Waters. Mike, thanks so much for joining the program. How are you today?
Wes, I'm doing great. And it's always fun to come on here onto the podcast and talk a little Syracuse basketball with you. And so, yeah, I've been looking forward to this. Looking forward to seeing your face again for the first time in a while.
Yeah. Well, Mike, this has been a 10-plus year run we've had of having you on the podcast and checking in with you before or maybe right after the season starts. So, Mike, we'll get you started here. Obviously, a shaky performance from Syracuse in Monday in its opener against Moyne. The Orange did take it 86-82, but was this a case of first game jitters, or is there something broader to be concerned about here?
I think there might have been a couple of the players that might have had a sort of a form of first game jitters. I think they might have been a little tight. I think sometimes when you're the heavy favorite in a game like that and all of a sudden you're 8 minutes in and the other team's ahead, and there's no way to score a 10-point basket and just make things right in your head. So it's going to take a while. And so there was partly that, but I think there's areas of real concern here. I mean, in the 2 exhibition games after each of those, Adrian Autry talked about the defense. Defense wasn't great. They got work to do on defense. And So, okay, yeah, that's great. Yeah, we know you have work to do on defense, and you kind of figured, well, they're going to turn it up a notch in the opener. The regular season's going to hit, and they'll play with more intensity, and they didn't. They really didn't. And is it fixable? I would think so. I mean, you look around at the team, and you're like, they should be able to play defense. They're athletic enough. They're big enough. But I tell you what, they have to play with more intensity. So you got to find that first and foremost. The other thing too that does stand out with this team is it's not like you have terrible defensive players. You have guys who can play defense. Some of them are more prone to lapses than others, but you don't have a couple, 2 or 3 dogs. You don't have a defensive ace, a real stopper anywhere, not at any position. I really don't see one. And maybe they'll prove me wrong. Maybe there's somebody out there, but I worry that you're trying to become a really good defensive team without a couple of guys that excel at it.
Okay, so Mike, that's obviously the concern on defense. Let's move over to the offense. Just pulling back a little bit, more of a 30,000-foot view. There's obviously been major roster turnover. Adrian Autry looks to have built a team more predicated around ball movement, especially with guys like Jaquan Carlos and Eddie Lampkin. Is that a fair assessment? Is that what you see?
Yeah, I think the offense is going to look different this year. It should. It needs to. I mean, for one, you don't have a ball dominant point guard like you had last year with Judah Mintz, who was going to be your leading scorer and your leading shot taker. And, the guy was going to get to the free throw line, which, sometimes it meant he didn't have the same sort of ball movement, but it also meant that when you needed a bucket, you knew who you were going to go to. And that's kind of reassuring too sometimes. So it'll look a little different. And it has in both the exhibitions and against Moyne. Ball moved, 15 assists last night on 30 made field goals. And, I think it would have been more if guys had been making the shots. The ball was moving. Guys, when you go 4 of 22 from 3-point range, that's going to limit your number of assists. So I think the ball still moved, but unlike the exhibition games, they just didn't make shots. So, I do think this team can make shots. I think they'll be better than last year. But, in the first half, Chris Bell didn't make a 3. In the second half, nobody besides Chris Bell made a 3, and and he only made 2. So that's a really tough. That's going to make it really tough for you offensively. They still managed to score 86 points. So I do think the 3-point shooting last night was a problem, but I think that's a problem that's going to be more easily fixed in the defense.
You bring up an interesting point there because last year, as you mentioned, Judah Mintz had the ball in his hands with the game on the line if that was the situation. This year, it seems like it's going to be JJ Starling. I don't know if you agree with that or if you find someone else on the roster that's really going to be that guy.
I think JJ's the most obvious candidate. I think he's the guy who's best capable of putting the ball on the floor. He's the threat to make an outside shot. The defense has to respect that. But if they come up on him, he can drive. He's got size for his position. He's a really strong kid for a shooting guard, a combo guard. So he's kind of can fill that Judah Mintz role, but maybe not quite as prolific as Judah was, but still you got that guy. But they're going to have other scoring options. And that's a real key because you might say, okay, this is the guy who we're going to give the ball to, but if we have 3-point threats like Donnie Freeman and Chris Bell on the perimeter, and maybe, and who knows who else you have in the game at the time, that makes it tough for the other team to defend and help. Who's going to come help off, their guy if JJ starts driving to the basket. So, and Jaquan Carlos is a really savvy playmaker. You might put the ball in his hands, not necessarily as a guy who's going to be the guy that's your go-to scorer, but you're going to be your playmaker. He's the guy that creates an opening for somebody else. But we'll have to see. I think a lot of that's developmental stuff, and we're going to have to see just what happens down the line in terms of how this team works near an game situation.
And Mike, we'll get you out of here on this one. As I mentioned, you've been on the show for 10 plus years now. I think it's actually been a dozen years. So congratulations on making it with me that long.
What do I win?
Another podcast. So what is the path to an NCAA tournament for this team? Are there key games you circled as Syracuse needing to win? And does this look like an NCAA tournament team to you?
I think we might have learned in the opener against Moyne we can't approach this season that way. And I was approaching the season that like, oh, they have to go to Brooklyn. And they played Texas on the opening night, and either Texas Tech or St. Joe's the next. Got to win one of those. Now, boy, if you beat Tennessee and Knoxville, that now you're really setting yourself up. You're in. But that Maryland neutral court game back in Brooklyn, another key one. I don't think we can do that. I mean, after watching them against Moyne, man, the most important game on the schedule is Colgate. And then the next most important game after that's going to be Youngstown State. You can't take anything for granted, because if they had lost that game to Moyne last night, it basically would have dashed their NCAA hopes on opening night. That would have been a quad 4 home loss, probably. And that it's so hard to overcome that. So I don't think with this team, with where they are, I'm not going to play that whole this is a key game thing this year. I just and neither should the Syracuse players. They need to approach Colgate with a lot more intensity than they did Moyne, and then they need to keep that up. So we'll see. Maybe with a week's time in between these first 2 games, maybe some of these players will start believing what the coaches are telling them.
Well, Mike, we always appreciate having you on again. Syracuse.com's Mike Waters. Mike, thanks for taking a few minutes with us. We appreciate it, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Wes, it's a pleasure. Good to see you.
Welcome back to the Juice on the Cuse podcast on the Believe Networks and Rivals.com with my longtime colleague, Wes Cheng. I'm Brad Bierman. And Wes, my final thought today, I'll stick with Syracuse basketball, albeit a former Syracuse basketball great and assistant coach, Jerry McNamara. And congratulations to G-Mac and the Siena Saints for his first head coaching victory in the season opener Monday night, edging Brown 72-71 in an overtime thriller in Albany. And Wes, they had about 4,500 fans there, and Siena had 3 free throws late in regulation to force OT, and then held on for the victory with great defense. And G-Mac got the Gatorade bath afterwards, and it was just a great day for Siena basketball and for Coach Jerry McNamara. And now he's got his first victory, and he's just 1,115 behind his mentor, Jim Boeheim, who also, by the way, Wes, got his first win against an Ivy League team, Harvard, back in 1976.
So, Brad, I look at that video of the post game, and they actually handed Jerry McNamara the game ball. And this is a team that only won 4 games the entire year last year. So Jerry McNamara already a quarter of the way to equaling the total. Congratulations to him. Also, congratulations to Peter Carey, the former Syracuse center who followed Jerry McNamara over to Siena. Looking forward to seeing more victories, hopefully the first of many for the former Syracuse assistant coach. And Brad, wanted to close the show by talking a little Syracuse football. Obviously, a big win for the Orange, coming down back from 21-3 down to top Virginia Tech in overtime, 38-31. That makes Syracuse bowl eligible for the 3rd straight year. That's the first time that's happened since the 1995 through 1999 season. Also, just a big win for recruiting. Several high-profile recruits on campus, including 5-star, I don't know how often you hear that, 5-star defensive lineman Javion Helson, 3-star quarterback Gavin Sidwar. It wasn't that great of a start for the Orange, but certainly was a great finish. Syracuse continues to push for top recruits ahead of the December early signing period.
And are you going to doubt Fran Brown now? I mean, I know there's 4 games left to play, but so far from what he's been saying, Wes, each step of the way, he's been eyeing that prize and keeping the focus of the team on that.
Yeah, let's see what they can do in the last 4 games. There's 3 very winnable games on the calendar. Boston College, Cal, Connecticut. Certainly not saying that Syracuse is going to win all of them, but certainly 3 games that are available for the taking before they finish the game, the season against Miami. So there's potential for 9, even 10 wins if you include the bowl game. We'll see what happens, Brad.
Yes, really interesting and a lot there to be playing for in the month of November.
That's it for us. For Brad Bierman, this is Wes Cheng. You've been listening to the Juice on the Cuse podcast presented by Believe in Rivals, and we will see you next time.